My mother told me he used to go behind enemy lines and rub shoulders with the enemy forces, and he never got caught. That was Duncan Peghamagabow. My name's Kevin, and today we're talking about Francis Peghamagabow on History Goon. What's going on, everybody? We are back. If I sound more intelligent, it's because I'm wearing a vest and a tie. Anyway, welcome back to History Goon. The last couple episodes, kind of a bummer, so I thought, what better way to lighten the mood than by revisiting the dreary hellscape that was World War I, or depending on how you want to look at it, maybe World War II. If you want to count the 7 Years' War as the actual First World War, considering the 7 Years' War was fought by multiple countries on multiple fronts on multiple continents. But I don't think we will. We'll count that as the 7 Years' War instead. Because, I mean, that's what, actual historians and stuff called it. So who am I to change any of that? This one's going to start somewhere that we haven't visited together yet. Canada. Don't worry. It's still got a sad start because, there's a few reasons for that. First off, this guy is a First Nations member of the Ojibwe Tribe. He's born in Canada, obviously, like we just said. People seem to forget that Canada was just as bad to natives as the U.S., and there's proof for that. Over the last few years, like the last probably 10 to 20 years, they've been finding a bunch of just mass burial sites of dead natives from near the government-run Indian schools and stuff like that. But they don't like to talk about that. They just brag about their free healthcare and whatnot. They don't talk about the awful stuff that they used to do too. But another thing that's going to make it suck for this guy is he's born after the 1876 Indian Act. This act made natives, quote, wards of the federal government, which basically treats them like minors that have no rights to do anything. They're also not Canadian citizens, even though they live there and have been there for generations. This was done under the veil, like the very, very thin veil of trying to stimulate the economy and promote self-sufficiency and assimilation into, quote, proper Canadian society. And I'm sure these people that have, been self-sufficient for centuries have no idea of how to do it. They've been hunting and gathering food and firewood and all that, dodging Wendigo, trading with white settlers, stuff like that. Oh, and fun fact, because of the Indian Act, natives weren't allowed to vote in federal elections until 1960. So that's a cool one too, right? Now let's get to the man of the hour or so, Francis Peghamagabow. I love when stories start like this because usually I get a little frustrated when I don't know any of this stuff or if I don't have an exact date. But Francis was probably born March 3rd, 1888, just north of Parry Sound, Ontario. This place is pretty busy nowadays. They've got a Dairy Queen. They've got the Bobby Orr Community Center. Parry Sound is the hometown to Boston Bruins legendary defenseman and NHL Hall of Famer Bobby Orr. Unfortunately, we're not here to talk about hockey. That would be kind of fun at some point, but do like a sports history thing, mix both of my favorite things in the world, I guess. Only some sports. Like some sports I can't stand watching. I can't watch basketball. It's too fast for me. I can't keep up with it. And it's not as fun as it was when I was a kid where guys would go out and just beat the crap out of each other. Now it's like everybody's got to shoot threes and nobody's trying to dunk and, I don't know. Everybody's falling over for no reason. Like they just got the vapors and passed out. I kind of hate it. Anyway, it's also the location of what's now the Shenanigua First Nations Reservation. His father, Michael, was part of the Perry Island Band, and his mother, Mary, was part of the Henvey Inlet Band, which was further up the bay from Perry Bay. He becomes a point of interest to the white folks in 1891 when the Indian superintendent of Perry Bay hit town to dole out the yearly payments to the tribe members, and he finds little Francis with his great-uncle Peter. And he starts asking questions like, hey, why do you have this kid? You didn't file any paperwork saying that you had a kid in the last year. And Peter's like, nah, he's not mine. He's my nephew. His father, my brother, died in between you guys sending payments up here. His mom skedaddled back to her tribe, and she just kind of dumped him with me. So I don't really know what to do with him either. So letters are sent back and forth between Walton and Indian Affairs to figure out who should be raising this kid. But more importantly, these letters are also trying to figure out who gets Michael's money. Because that's more important than who's taking care of this child, is who's getting this dude's money. He ended up in the care of a tribal elder that had actually raised Michael, so his father, after his parents had died. This is all done after getting approval from Francis's great uncle James Peghamagabow, who is the chief of the Perry Island Band. And since he gave permission for him to be raised by these people, Indian Affairs can't really do anything. Because it's not a situation where they can dictate who does what. They can control everything else about these people's lives, but that's one of the gray areas, I guess. From age 7, the Ojibwe, much like the Spartans, minus the training to death and fighting giant wolves solo, a la the documentary 300, start teaching their kids all the necessary skills to hunt, fish, collect firewood, cook, all this stuff. And the boys would do foot races and wrestle, little boy stuff. But at some point in this age range, Francis had a weird experience. I mean, weird to us. Probably not weird to, him and his people. The natives held a lot of strong beliefs in the power of dreams. Kids would be asked pretty much every morning to tell their parents what their dreams were about the night before. And sometimes if one of them held like a more powerful meaning, the tribe would gather around and do a ritual depending on what it was. Francis has a really particular dream one night, and during his ritual, he is told to swallow gunpowder to, quote, make his soul in shadow more alert and observant and prepare him for a visit and blessing from a Manitou in the future. A Manitou is a spirit god of some sort that, something that their tribe believed in. I have no idea. So unfortunately, we don't know a bunch about his childhood because it's, the 1890s and he's an Indian, so records are spotty to say the least. From what his son Duncan would say, Francis was a fairly sickly kid. And he told Duncan when he was a kid that he would run from one village to another back and forth every day to help him build himself back up and get his health back, which actually worked. So starting around the age of 12, he starts working. He's got quite a little resume. He's tending livestock. He worked at a lumberyard, and he also worked for two separate fishermen. And the next time he is seen for our case is in 1911, when he rolls back into Perry Sound just in time for the census, where he claims to be 21 years old. Which, if you math the math, that puts him at 23, not 21. But there's also a possibility that he may not have known exactly when he was born, so he may have not realized that he was 2 years older than he actually was. Regardless of all this, the book that I used as a resource said that at his, quote, advanced age, he wanted to go back and finish school. 23 being an advanced age makes me feel like I'm 150 years old, which, God, being 21 again would be cool. Nah. Now that I think about it, I don't think it would be. Because I was like an alcoholic and I didn't have any money and a real bad job. Yeah, that would suck. I'd take 28. That'd be cool. Knock 10 years off. My back and knees wouldn't hurt just because I woke up. That'd be great. Anyway, so school's an important thing, obviously. Education, super important. Not as important as the eating gunpowder in preparation for what's going to kick off here in a few years. Spoiler alert, it's World War I. It's going to be what's kicking off here. So he has to jump through a series of hoops to get back into school, including having to go to the Crown Attorney of Perry Sound, Walter Lockwood Haig. That term may sound really British, and that's because it is really British, but that's also because Canada was essentially just West Britain with wolves and moose. So he also has to go to the tribal council about trying to get his room and board paid for because mongering fish doesn't really pay the bills. They shot the idea down. That's not the last thing that's going to get shot in our little adventure here, but I don't want to spoil it. And Haig told them that if they didn't allow him to attend, he would take it up with Indian Affairs and possibly have their federal money cut and or taken away altogether. Quote, denying an education to such a bright, promising boy who ought to be encouraged in every way would not be tolerated. which is something that Haig wrote in his letter to Chief Peter Megas, who is the new chief after the previous Peghamagabow had been voted out, which I didn't realize until I started doing the research, that the chief status in tribes, at least in Canada and this area of Canada, was all done by election. I thought, from just the general knowledge that I had, I always thought it was like by appointment, where the chief would pick his successor, or you would take over from the chief if he was your father or like your uncle and he didn't have any kids, something like that. I didn't realize that it was done by election, which is really cool. Kind of wish I had that, the more you know thing that I could put in, but I can't right now. So pretty quickly after that, in January of 1911, Peghamagabow is accepted into classes. It's shocking what threatening to take money away from an entire group of people can accomplish. And I'm sure he wasn't the only one that was trying to get an education that they're like, nah, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure they would have gone to bat for like a group of kids over just one adult, I guess. So Francis took his schooling like deadly serious, including learning how to read and perform music. Don't go thinking he's going to be like a professional brass musician and entertain wounded troops in hospitals. This isn't that kind of story. But he will excel in the wood and steel section of the band here shortly. Duncan, in a 1990 interview, had this to say about his father's time in school. Quote, "I have a great admiration for the man because he seemed to do a lot of these things on his own. He didn't have the kind of support that, for instance, I would be looking for if I embarked on a musical career or a career in sports. I would always tend to look back, but he seemed to thrive on his own determination. He has no family. He's got nobody to count on but himself. And that's going to come to show here as we go through this, where he might not have family, but he's not alone, By the following year in 1912, Francis is getting a little antsy and he wants to start exploring. So he signs on with the Lambaton as part of the Department of Marine and Fisheries and travels all over Parry Sound Base, goes down into Lake Huron, and then while he's out there, he starts writing about customs and traditions of other Ojibwe people that he runs into. In 1913, he runs into a little bit of a problem. He contracted typhoid fever. Now, if you don't know what that is, typhoid fever is caused by a bacteria called Salmonella typhi that can contaminate food or water. You can also get it from coming into contact with someone else that has typhoid fever. There's this really cool lady named Mary that I may or may not talk about at some point. That was pretty popular with the typhoid crowd. So this particular salmonella is like the kind of stuff that makes you sick from eating undercooked chicken. It's like that, like adjacent from there. It's still going to ruin your day. Symptoms include high fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit, or, since he's Canadian, 39.5 degrees Celsius, headache, tummy pain, diarrhea, and constipation at the same time, which sounds interesting, to be backed up and then just a poop waterfall and then backed up again. It's like those log rides at like an amusement park where here comes a log and then there's nothing but water for a long time. And then here comes another log and then there's nothing but water for a long time. Loss of appetite, which I'm sure that would probably help. Intestinal bleeding, heart infections, and death. So we saved the fun ones for last. The rest of the crew gets him to the church run by the Sisters of St. Joseph in Parry Sound. And they get him back into ship shape, or man shape, or shape for a man to be on a ship, is what we'll go with. On June 28th, 1914, 27-year-old or 29-year-old or whatever he was, Francis is probably out on a boat just doing his thing. Maybe he's having a good day. Maybe he's having a bad day. But you know who else is having a bad day? Archduke Franz Ferdinand is about to have a bad day. Gavrilo Princip wasn't having a great day either. His bros had all kind of screwed the pooch on an assassination attempt on Franz, and he took off to go get a sandwich because everybody else had screwed up, so he's like, I may as well get something to eat. So he's in the sandwich shop looking at the menu, and there's music in the background. He's trying to figure out if he wants pickles or he just wants Something simple. Pickles might be a little different. Anyway, he gets a sandwich. He goes outside and he finds a car that stopped outside the wrong sandwich shop in Sarajevo. Turns out, though, Gavrilo is about to start doing curbside delivery. In all fairness, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was asking for it if you saw how he was dressed. And also, I just learned that his mother's name and title are absolutely insane. Princess Maria Annuccia of Bourbon, Two Sicilies. He deserved to be assassinated just for his mother's name. That's incredible. But this is also what happens when your parents are like siblings or cousins or whatever. European royalty. They don't spread the love very far. So the death... One more time. So the death of a man 4,506.805 miles away from his home is about to alter his life forever. Take a second to think about that. Francis Peghamagabow has probably never even heard of Franz Ferdinand up until then. He may not have even heard about him after then. And because the extended royal family of Europe couldn't help but get into a pissing match over it, again, in all fairness, one of their wives is getting her guts relocated by a homeless wizard, but that's no reason to start a war. Anyway, Franz and his wife both get shot by the angry sandwich man. Austria, Hungary, and Germany declare war on Serbia. Russia backs Serbia. Germany declares war on Russia, Italy, and France. And 4,506.805 miles away, back in Canada, Francis is about to become part of the British war machine. Britain joins the fray August 4th, 1914, and that meant that they are bringing the entire band. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Canada, they all join the same day. Because when the king calls his people to war, it means all of them. Unless you come from money or royalty, unless you're Belgian royalty. Not that one. Not the one we just talked about. His successor, King Albert I, actually went and fought in World War I in the trenches, which he will definitely be the next Belgian I cover because we need a redemption arc for Belgium after Leopold. So not long after the call went out, a tent appears in Parry Sound at the fairgrounds. The 23rd Northern Pioneers set this as a rally point for volunteers to join one of the 6 companies in the regiment. When Francis Peghamagabow ran to the fairgrounds on August 13th, 1914, it's hard to say why he went. He could have gone to try to get away from his past, which wasn't exactly the best. Or maybe he wanted to go fight for a country that didn't really give a wet fart about him. Maybe he thought that going and fighting for this country would earn him some better opportunities when he got back for work, and maybe he'd be treated like a human being, which would be kind of cool. Or maybe it was the gunpowder in his belly that called him to join and become a warrior like his ancestors. Either way, he wants to go play Kraut Boys and Indians. It wasn't just him either. Of the 11,500 Indians eligible for service, 3,500 to 4,000 volunteered to go fight, which comes out to be like 35% of the eligible population. And that's a fairly close percentage to the white population that volunteered. I think the white population was like high 30s, like 37 to 42% or something like that were volunteers. The rest were draftees. But not long after the war started, the Canadian Surgeon General advised Indian Affairs that Indians would be recommended to not be allowed to join. And it's not for the reason you may think, though. The Surgeon General wrote a letter, quote, "I would point out that it has been decided that while British troops would be proud to be associated with their Indian fellow subjects, that's probably not true. The Germans may refuse to extend them the privileges of civilized warfare." First off, the Germans should have been the ones worried about fighting Canadians. There is a good section of the Geneva Convention after World War I that was based directly off what the Canadians did, where they would bait people, basically, where they would, if the trenches were close enough that they could communicate with the Germans, they'd be like, "Hey, we don't really want to fight you guys. We're all on the same page here, yeah? We'll throw, they'd throw canned food and cigarettes and candy and all that stuff over. Then after a couple of volleys of food and fun stuff going over, they would start throwing grenades. And after they've made sauerkraut stew in the trench line, they could just kind of go and take it back over and collect all their stuff that wasn't punctured and move up a trench. It's they rolled a nat 20 and we're just like, this is ours now. Secondly, the word civilized warfare doesn't belong anywhere near World War I. Peghamagabow would end up part of the 1st Battalion of the Western Ontario Regiment. And here's the funny thing. He joined after the order went out saying that Indians shouldn't be going over there because, Germans mean. That means that he slipped through the cracks somehow and would end up in England swearing an oath to King George V on September 15th, 1914. The reason for this is probably because his battalion commander was pretty rad. Fred William Hill, who is a lawyer and former mayor of Niagara Falls, was doing troop inspections, and when he saw this kid that's like a little bit too dark to be white, he's like, you must be Italian, and just kind of kept going down the line. Because he didn't care what you looked like or what your genetic makeup was. If you're willing to go fight and die in another country for the stupidest reason, you're okay in his book. Major William Ireland of the Northern Pioneers, who just so happened to be the editor of the Parry Sound North Star, which is a newspaper, he wouldn't be going into combat because at the age of 61, this war is past his bedtime. He's already had he had dinner at 4:30. He's got maybe a glass of wine in him. It's like 7 o'clock and he's like, pushing it. I better hit the hay here. He wrote, quote, Peghamagabow's great-grandfather was a warrior and chief and fought for the British in 1812. So the boy comes by his fighting instincts from a long line of fighting ancestors who fought in the Indian Wars. We're all hoping Francis will distinguish himself as his forefathers did and will come home covered with glory and medals. His example might well be followed. He has no idea how right he's about to be. So Francis joins the army, and he assimilates like a mother fornicator. He likes the structure because of his background working on ships. And in an environment like that, it doesn't matter what you look like. You guys have to all work together, or you're probably, there's a chance that you're not going to come home one day because somebody fell overboard and you're like, I don't want to help an Indian, I'll throw him a raft. Ugh, that's gross. So his mostly white comrades made mention that no matter how difficult the training was or how bad the conditions were, he was always smiling. And that right there, that would disturb me. To see a guy like, as you're crawling through mud with barbed wire like 3 inches above you, that you're crawling underneath and they're firing live rounds over your head, and this dude is just smiling, like looking crazy. That's the guy that you either want to be directly next to in a trench or on the other side of the front from, because you never know what he's going to do. But they did start calling him Peggy for short, and hi mom, how are you? After they arrived in England, he kept some of his traditions with him, including his small wigwam tent that he painted with Ojibwe symbols. And just for fun, like when he very rarely got to mingle with the locals and some of the other British troops, mostly the British troops that he'd like to do this to, he would actually tell them that back home where he came from, he was the chief of his tribe. Most of these people believed him, and the Canadians didn't do anything to say otherwise. They weren't going to they're not going to take the wind out from underneath them and be like, he's just messing with it. No, it's fun. It's funny to screw with these people. So the Canadians would train until late January 1915, which is apparently one of the wettest winters in English history. But after that, they set sail from Avonsmouth and would land at Saint-Nazaire, France on February 11th. Then they took a short 419.426 mile train ride to Armentez, France, which was the front line on the Belgian border. Yay, Belgium again, right? They're good guys this time. Don't worry about it. When World War I kicked off, things moved pretty quickly for the most part for a short period of time. Regiments and battalions took town and land pretty fast. But by the time the Canadians arrived, things had started to grind to a standstill, which is going to be how it's going to be for the next 3.5 years, basically. Francis is now on the northern part of the 475-mile long Western Front. It's hard to really comprehend that there was a nearly unbroken line of trenches that ran from the North Sea all the way to the famously neutral Swiss border. When I hit Google Maps to see this town that he'd been sent to kind of compare the map of the Western Front to where he is, it kind of made my nuts crawl up in my a little bit because I recognized a couple of the names in his area that we will get to in a bit, and they're not good places to be during World War I. They did arrive to some pretty choice accommodations, though. They got trenches dug at water level, capped with sandbags, duckboard floors, stale, smelly water that was sometimes reach as high as knee level, and probably the worst neighbors across the street you could ever imagine. They're very inconsiderate. They've got snipers. They're constantly taking pot shots at them. And from time to time, and when I say time to time, I mean all the time, there's artillery shells that sound like train cars flying overhead. Here's a lighthearted little quote about the artillery. Quote, "The mind-numbing, near-deafening noise and bone-rattling vibrations were bad enough, but the wounds were worse, much worse. At its worst, a bursting shell could disintegrate a man so that nothing recognizable remained of him. Less spectacular, but sometimes as deadly, shell blast could create overpressure or vacuums in the body organs, rupturing lungs and producing hemorrhages in the brain and spinal cord." Sounds like a good time, right? The first few weeks on the front were kind of weird because they fell into like this routine of holding the line for a few days, then going back for showers and hot food and to kind of relax for a couple of days, only to go back to relieve the guys that took their place in the first place. Sometimes they got lucky enough to be given some of that sweet, sweet cocaine for the walk back to the front. If you haven't checked out the War on Drugs episode that I did before, you should. There's a lot of cool stories in there about that. So you remember when I was talking about the time where like his location on the line made my butt pucker a bit? That's because early April of 1915, the entire Canadian division has marched to the Ypres salient. Now, a salient is basically just a bulge that forms in a battle line where the defenders are surrounded on three sides, and they basically just get the crap beat out of them because you get the line, and then there's just like this bulge where everybody's hanging out. It's like a sideways nutsack in the battle line. So this is sketchy for a couple of reasons. First off, this is the last scrap of Belgian ground that is still under Allied control. This is in West Flanders, Belgium, and if you have even a passing interest in World War I, you already know that Flanders is one of the most fought-over places in the entirety of Europe. Many a song have been written and sung about the battles in Flanders, and most of them are not happy. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and say none of them are happy. And this is also just down the road, less than an hour from where World War II almost came to a screeching halt very quickly, very on in the war, at the town of Dunkirk. So this is a historically bad place to be. The second reason this is kind of sketchy is because this is Ypres. There's 5 major battles that are going to be fought in Ypres over the course of the war, and the number of deaths across them is estimated to be well over 1 million lives lost between both sides. Francis Peghamagabow was lucky enough to fight in not 1, but 2 of the battles that took place in Ypres. April 22nd, 1915 should be considered one of the most important dates in World War I, because this is the first time that Germans released the contents of 6,000 cylinders of chlorine gas. This is done under the direct supervision of the creator of the gas, a Nobel Prize winner and historical penis exfoliator, Fritz Haber. Don't worry, I've already started the research. He's going to get his episode. I'm going to give you both sides of the story because some books are like, he was a hero. He won a Nobel Prize because he helped with farming and blah, 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 blah. And then other books are like, he's a monster because you can literally place the deaths of at least 100,000 men directly at his feet. And the research that he did would also lead directly to the development of Zyklon B, which was used to kill an unimaginable number of Jews during World War II at the extermination camps. So, you know, good guy, bad guy, a little bit of both. There's a Sabaton song called Father about him, where they make the argument of during times when there's peace, he belonged to the world, but in times when there's war, he belonged to his place of birth, which is, Because, like, if World War I had never happened and we had just had his research for what he did to, like, aerate farmland to make more fertile ground to farm, this guy would have been one of the greatest people that ever existed. But because he loved his country more than he did the rest of humanity, he's a monster. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get back to the fun stuff. The low-lying olive green gas crept across the grounds and then settled into the trenches. And since these guys didn't know that this was even a possibility, they wouldn't have any way to protect themselves from it. Fairly early on with these gas attacks, like before the Allies had a working prototype for gas masks, a lot of them would use handkerchiefs. And since you don't really have a lot of water, or the water that you have is disgusting, they would piss on them and wrap them around their faces to help to filter the gas so that they could get out. Which, I mean, breathing in your own piss is probably better than breathing in, chlorine. But what do I know? I wasn't there. But they would get their first design for like a very, very basic gas mask would hit the trenches in June of 1915. Credit to the Germans, though, because this attack created a 4-mile-wide hole in the line. The following day, the Canadian 1st and 4th Battalions are supposed to join the French for a counterattack on the German line near the town of Pilkem. The Canadians showed up to the rally point at 5 a.m., but there is no French, except for maybe the ones that they brought with them from Canada. Who was there, though, was Germans about 1,500 yards away on Mauser Ridge, and they're laying barbed wire and setting up defensive positions to make the charge up the 30-foot hill a little bit more difficult. About 30 minutes later, at 5:30, the 4th was ordered to attack because their commander thought, didn't know for a fact, didn't get any intel about it, he thought that he saw the French on the left flank. So they fixed bayonets and they charge across no man's land toward the hill. And the Germans laid waste to them once they got close. By 7:30 that morning, the survivors are hunkered down in shell craters. None of them had made it to within 500 yards of the hill. So this guy's like, go get them. I see the French. Don't worry. They're here. Later in the day, the British 13th showed up and only added to the casualty list. By the end of the attack, there'd be 400 casualties, including 59 dead and 34 missing. During World War I, missing didn't mean that they thought that you got like shot at and you ran away. Now, missing meant that you were missing because they couldn't find enough of you to say that you were dead. You vanished. You probably got hit in the forehead with an artillery piece, and then now you're missing everything. So we, of course, have no clue what Francis is thinking during this. He's seen his guys die and get wounded all around him. But what we do know is that he is the main character. He got a force field upgrade before he came over. He wrote to a journalist in Parry Sound later on in life. The man's name was Jeunesse. Quote, "When I was at Rossport on Lake Superior in 1914, some of us landed from our vessel to gather blueberries near an Ojibwe camp. An old Indian recognized me and gave me a tiny medicine bag to protect me, saying I would shortly go into great danger. The bag was of skin, tightly bound with a leather thong. Sometimes it seemed to be hard as rock, at other times it appeared to contain nothing. What was really inside it, I do not know. I wore it in the trenches every day. So call it faith, call it magic, call it luck, whatever. He's protected. Nothing's going to happen to our boy here during the war. Well, maybe. Records are a bit spotty, unfortunately. But we do know that by August 26th, he had been promoted to Lance Corporal. What's different with Francis Peghamagabow from other dudes that fought in the trenches is that Francis made his name more in the quiet moments of the war. So if you were to build this guy as a Skyrim character, right, you'd obviously pick him for his racial bonuses alone. He's got plus 20 to sneak. He's got plus 20 to sneak attack damage. His sneak branch on the skill tree is like maxed out, so he has the 100% muffled walking bonus. He also gets bonus on ranged attacks. Francis Peghamagabow is basically, if you were to build like a rogue ranger kind of deal, for like D&D or whatever. But of course, you've played through a few times and you're like, I'm going to make a guy that's going to fight with two-handed weapons this time. Then you go into the first cave and you're like, oh, sweet, a bow. And then for the 35th time in a row, you become a stealth archer because you can't help it. Then you pair that with this amulet of, you can't kill me, so suck it, nerd. And he's unstoppable. He fashioned himself into a scout sniper, a ghost in the trenches, if you will. This was a time before scout sniper teams were a thing, where you'd have one guy with a rifle set up to kill someone at 600 miles away, and a guy with a battle rifle of some flavor and a spotting scope. Francis worked completely alone. One of his favorite things to do was to camouflage himself and creep along the ground through no man's land, moving from crater to crater, staying as low as possible. He's crawling under barbed wire, he's hiding behind dead bodies, moving as quickly as safety will allow, meaning he's not moving very quickly at all. Wait until I get a chance to cover Carlos Hathcock if you want to find out how quickly combat snipers move. Pack a lunch and make sure you pee before we leave. The reason he did all this is because he was regularly, like regularly sneaking into German trenches and messing with these guys. He'd sneak in and steal maps and intel that were left laying around on the little makeshift shelves that they would dig into the trenches. He even had a couple of times where he talked about grabbing unattended rifles and tools and just moving them or hiding them on the Germans just for fun. He also liked to find guys that were by themselves or in pairs and just stand behind them to see if they noticed. I kind of want a World War I horror movie from the German perspective of you've got Fritz and Hans and they're talking and the camera pans back to Hans and he's talking. Then it pans over to Fritz and he's talking, then it goes back to Hans and he says something, and then it goes back to Fritz, and the creature in the descent, Francis Peghamagabow, is just standing behind him staring at him and then just shanks the guy in the neck. That would be awesome. I would watch that weekly. So he would do all of this and then sneak back to home base with whatever he could carry. I'm pretty sure that sometimes he was coming back with pockets full of German chocolates and cigarettes and maybe a couple of rifles, who knows? Maybe a young Austrian went to open his ration kit and found his chocolate missing, and in its place, a poop. He looks up to see one of his fellow trench mates taking his helmet off and notices a little hat underneath, and he gets the wrong idea. Now, that is historical fiction, of course. Because yes, Hitler did fight in the trenches, and yes, he did have a notorious sweet tooth with some German reports saying that he would eat up to 2 pounds of chocolate a day when he was in office. So there's two things I can agree with Hitler on, right? This is going to get taken out of context, and that's fine. Dogs are cool because he liked dogs, and I could definitely eat 2 pounds of chocolate a day. Other than that, I agree with absolutely nothing he did. So don't get the wrong idea, because he was a monster, but hey, chocolate and dogs are cool. Just don't mix the two, because that's a bad time. I do highly doubt that Francis Peghamagabow made Hitler hate the Jews. But again, yeah, anything I say here is a joke. In March of 1916, he would be one of the first 78 Canadian soldiers awarded the newly minted and very creatively named Military Medal, which, for having the worst name of all time, is actually the third highest award that would be given out to non-commissioned officers, behind the Distinguished Conduct Medal and the Victoria Cross. Most of the guys that were put up for these medals had no clue what they did that would warrant any of it. All they knew is they were being called to the back for a decoration parade, which you're going to take that because it's going to get you off the front for a couple of days. You're going to get a hot meal and a shower. You don't have to deal with being shot at constantly, so you get a little bit of a break. Later in his life, all he told people is that he won it at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. Much like most of the guys that came back from World War I, he didn't really like going too deep on his experiences. If you ever want to watch something that'll absolutely break your heart, go on YouTube and find video interviews of World War I survivors and just watch these guys. You can see it in their eyes that there's something broken there that they cannot fix. A lot of them are rocking back and forth. They can't form thoughts into words to explain what's going on in their head because they are that busted up inside. It's heartbreaking. It was found later, like way later, like the early 2000s, that his battalion Lieutenant Colonel Frank Creighton had actually put him up for a Distinguished Conduct Medal on March 1st, 1916, for, quote, for continuous service as a messenger from February 14th, 1915 to February 1916. He carried messages with great bravery and success during the whole of the actions at Ypres, Festubert, and Givenchy. In all his work, he consistently shown a disregard for danger, and his faithfulness to duty is highly commendable, which carrying messages is also going to be a part of that scout sniper thing that he's doing, because like he's already going sneaking around. He may as well take your mail with him, you know. His service record shows, and this is kind of strange, September 1916, he requests to receive a demotion back to private. Because again, he is a lance corporal, but he wants to go back to being a private. Not real sure why he would have wanted this. Maybe he didn't want the recognition or the extra responsibility that came with a higher rank. Or maybe he's told that since he was of a slightly higher rank that he wouldn't be allowed to go do his sneaking around because he's too valuable to lose. Anyway, September 22nd, 1916, he finds himself in a field hospital with a bullet in his left leg. He took this demotion a week before he was wounded in an attack on German lines east of the town of Courcelette. After taking the trenches is when he gets wounded there. Now, I say he gets wounded like he walked into like an exposed nail or something, or he twisted his ankle. His leg was wounded so badly that it took 5 months of recovery, and the surgeons thought that they were going to have to amputate it at one point. Francis really did not like being in the hospital. So his injury is so bad that they move him from the ambulatory unit in France, which is like a field hospital. They transport him back to England, and here he starts getting antsy. Quote, the reality of soldiering is nothing to me, although I had 20 months under shell fire in France, which I found not half as bad as being laid up in an English hospital. Man, oh God, I couldn't imagine English hospital food. Oh, hospital food here is bad and English food is bad. Oh, that's miserable. Ugh, I would wish I didn't have teeth. Anyway, he rejoined the lines in May 1917, not long after the assault on Vimy Ridge, where a combined 3,598 Brits and Canadians died for a hump of land covered in barbed wire. They call it a ridge. It was not a ridge. It's like a 20-foot rise in the ground. When he got back, he's greeted by guys that he recognized, and he's also greeted by a lot of new faces, and he's being told about the guys that were killed while he was out there. He's a little bummed because when he comes back, there's a lot more new faces than old friends. He did, however, see a new old face, that of Isaac Menominee, who grew up in Parry Sound and joined the year after Francis. By this point, the Canadian government decided to bump the number of troops by 500,000. And the trick here was to set up recruiting stations in each county and district, hoping that young men would sign up in groups with their friends. If you've ever seen All Quiet on the Western Front, that's exactly what happened in that movie. Is a bunch of German kids are like in high school, and there's like 5 or 6 of them, I think, and they all go down and they join the same day because they're convinced by their teacher that going to war is this adventure and you get to see the world and it's romantic and all this, and then you get to watch them just be killed and then get destroyed as human beings through the whole movie. I haven't seen the new one. I do remember seeing the old one in high school during like history class, and then I think we watched it again in cinema class at one point. Which yeah, that was a cool class. It was hey, you want to watch movies for a period? Yeah, that'd be great. So there is a lot of infighting between tribal leaders, Indian affairs, and government officials about these recruiting stations being set up on the reservations. All this is going on at the same time that the 1st Canadian is moving back into Ypres in November 1917. Again, Francis, being the luckiest man on the planet, is about to take part in the 3rd Battle of Ypres, more commonly known as the Battle of Passchendaele. Boy, this is one of the most important battles in World War I. If you want to like look at the numbers, you have 50 divisions of Brits and 6 divisions of Canadians. 18,000 men, per division. That's over 1 million men on the Allied side. On the other side, you've got 83 divisions of Germans, which is 1.5 million men. The average age of the soldiers in World War I was 25 years old. Some of them were as young as 16 and 17 on both sides. Those numbers aren't comfortable to think about, considering the vast number of the casualties that are going to occur on both sides. So what makes this battle important is that Passchendaele is on the easternmost ridge of Ypres, where there's a massive train depot that is supplying the German Fourth Army. If the Allies can cut that off and choke the German Fourth off, they could stop the push that would potentially turn the Ypres salient into a full-blown hole in the line. In early November 1917, Peghamagabow and the Canadian 1st, 3rd, and 4th Divisions slogged from one crater to another and would end up a quarter of a mile from the ridge. Next step is for the 1st and 2nd Divisions to overrun the German lines under artillery barrage, which is going to be fun. For his actions and skill set, Francis is promoted back up to corporal. Again, before this major push. Part of the reason for this is that NCOs, including corporals, are now being trained up on how to take over a platoon in case of a higher NCO, like a sergeant, being killed. This is so that even in the event that the platoon leader dies, they've got someone that it can fall to with training and rank that can give orders and come up with ideas as to how to go about doing things. Peghamagabow took over his platoon at one point in the attack, and this earned him his 2nd military medal. Here is his actually pretty detailed and very in-depth citation, considering it's World War I. Quote, "At Passchendaele, November 6th, 7th, 1917, this NCO did excellent work. Before and after the attack, he kept in touch with the flanks, advising units he had seen. This information proving the success of the attack and saving time and consolidating. He also guided the relief to its proper place after it had become mixed up." So, I mean, yeah, that's for World War I. That's a pretty well detailed one. Years after the war, he opened up about what happened, what actually happened while he was there. That I got a feeling this didn't set well with him for the rest of his life. Quote, "At our objective, we suffered very heavily from our own gunfire. I done all I could to stop it by reporting to our CO, Lieutenant Colonel Albert Walter Sparling, and the artillery observers. My comrades going up in pieces, shell after shell. I had no relatives at home. I was only fighting for my comrades. At daylight, cannonade was still going strong. Presence of mind came to me. I had a flare pistol with me. I shot a white flare. Millions of eyes saw it. It should have been fired when we reached our objective anyway. The moment I shot the flare, field guns ceased fire." So that's a man that came to the realization that because he was so scrambled up and dealing with like being blown up and being shot at, that he forgot that he had this flare gun. And if he had touched it off as soon as he got to where he needed to be, he could have saved a bunch of his friends. And I'm sure that didn't sit in a comfortable place in his head for the rest of his life. After a bunch of fighting, he'd find himself headed back to the rear for treatment of a crippling case of pneumonia. So anytime somebody got pneumonia or any kind of respiratory issue, they were shipped back to England, not just to the ambulatory center. They're going back to England because with a compromised immune system and respiratory issues, if you get gassed again, you are dead. There's no question about it. You're not going to make it. It's just not going to work for you. He would return to May in 1918, having finally caught a break and missed the end of the Battle of Passchendaele. Final count on that, these are low numbers, right? This is the low end of the spectrum of casualties here. 240,000 casualties, high end 449,000 casualties on the Allied side. 217 to 400,000 casualties for the Germans. Nearly 800,000 young men are either crippled or killed in the muddy fields in a tiny area for what? It's hard to imagine that most of these men, boys, when they signed up, thought that this was going to be an adventure. This is going to be romantic. And just to die in a town you've never heard of, surrounded by men crying for their mothers in different languages but saying the same thing. Dying slowly in the rain and mud and rats and trenches because a group of college kids decided to kill a member of European royalty in Sarajevo 3 years before this. 2 bullets ended the lives of 22 million people, soldiers and civilians. The most pointless war fought in European, maybe world history. Believe it or not, I didn't start this show to like glorify war because war sucks. It's the individuals that are the important part. Their stories are all worth telling. And yeah, you can look at Wikipedia and you can see the numbers killed and move on and like take the whole Stalin quote with it of, 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic. Unless you take a minute to think that each and every one of those was a person that was either fighting for something they believed in, or they were fighting for the guy next to them, or they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that's enough sappy stuff. Let's get back to the fun stuff, right? Let's get back to some Canadians kicking ass and taking land. August 8th, the Amiens offensive kicked off, and the 1st Battalion was lucky enough to be held in reserve while the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th took part in an attack at 4:20 a.m. An hour later, the 1st is sent out, but not as backup. They have to get up to where these guys are at because the next day they are spearheading a charge to clear German lines from the southern part of Beaufort. And while they did that, they actually captured the town of Follet, and they took about 60 prisoners, 16 machine guns, 2 anti-tank guns, and 2 mortars, which is a pretty good haul for the day. Over the course of 48 hours, the Canadians took over 5,000 prisoners and 8 miles of land, which is huge when you consider in most places they're fighting for increments of feet, inches, and yards. And they're fighting over that for days, weeks, and months. August 26th, the Battle of Scarpa kicked off. 4 days later, the Canadian 1st, 2nd, and 3rd charged out of the trenches and into machine gun fire at 4:20 a.m. Again. Early on, some Canadians are taken prisoner, but the 1st Battalion, where Francis is, reports that all enemy positions have been taken. Between the assault and the German counterattack, the 1st Battalion lost 167 men. Among them was not Francis Peghamagabow. Because remember, he's the main character. He can't be killed. How does a fat electrician refer to it? Plot armor. During the fighting, he would earn his 2nd bar on his military medal. Lieutenant Colonel Sparling wrote on his commendations, quote, "During the operation on August 30th, 1918 at Oryx Trench, near Upton Wood, when his company were almost out of ammunition and in danger of being surrounded, this NCO went over the top under heavy machine gun and rifle fire, brought back sufficient ammunition to enable the position to carry on and assist in repulsing heavy enemy counterattacks." That's now his 3rd military medal, but after 3 years of nearly constant shelling and constantly being shot at, Francis is starting to change. It's almost like he's going through an incredibly traumatic event that would shatter the mind of even the strongest human being alive, or, something like that. Whatever. He started developing some disciplinary issues. He's starting to think that his company's sergeant major was treating him like absolute garbage because he was different. By different, I mean not white. And he's assigning him the worst tasks that he can find. So Peggy, being a rational man, went over his head to the company commander and told him that this guy basically didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. And things like this happened a few times, and he is eventually sent off to the field ambulatory unit again on September 12th of 1918. They sent him back here to be checked over. One of these days while he's back there, he grabbed his rifle and buried it in the chest of a medical officer, accusing him of being a German spy. I can hear you asking, why was this guy a German spy? I'm glad you asked. Because it turns out this medical officer that was hanging out near a water well didn't have any tools to test the water. He was probably just like hanging out, smoking a butt, waiting for somebody to come back up so he didn't feel like a dick for bringing the bucket up out of the well to get 1 cup of water out of it. Another time that he gets into some trouble is he was given a direct order by his sergeant major who doesn't like him because he's not white. he's given an order to change posts, which he refused because it was not in writing, which is the most military thing I've ever heard. He also wasn't real big on Colonel Sparling either. Sparling made a name for himself at Vimy Ridge just before Francis came back from being hurt. He won the DSO, the Distinguished Service Order, for tackling and, by all accounts, beating the brakes off an enemy sniper. Here's what Francis had to say about him later in life. Quote, Colonel Sparling, he had it in for me. He used me like a dozen men. Half my reports, he would not believe them. I did not think much of him. Most of the time, I engaged myself in sniping so he couldn't find me when he wanted me. He nearly got captured one night and lost all the scout section after he denied my report of what I saw on the front. I done all I could for Colonel Sparling, but I could never please him. And again, yeah, that was written in a letter to Brigadier General Fred Hill in like 1931, 1932, somewhere in there. Wasn't obviously going to say that right then because that's suicide. So with all of his outbursts and generalized weirdness, he's shipped back to England for observation. He gets bounced around from military hospital to military hospital until November 11th, when he's officially diagnosed with, quote, exhaustion psychosis, which is exactly what you think it is. The good news for the Germans was that he would not be allowed to go back to mainland Europe because he is diagnosed the same day that World War I officially ends. He'd end up being shipped back to St. Andrew's Military Hospital in Toronto in April of 1919, but he's cut loose the following month in May of the same year. When he and dozens of other khaki-clad locals climbed off the train in Parry Sound, one of the first people to greet him, because he didn't have any of his own family, was the new editor of the North Star newspaper, John Dick. The newspaper man wanted his whole story, but was either impressed or appalled by the fact that Francis Peghamagabow, this young Indian with a warm smile and a great sense of humor, had killed a confirmed 378 Germans in the trenches, which makes him the most prolific and efficient sniper in all of World War I on either side. He apparently smiled the whole time that he was talking about his experience in Europe. He did all this work with a Ross rifle, which earned like a fairly bad reputation due to it being quite a bit longer than the Lee Enfield, which makes it a bit unwieldy in the trenches. Because when you're in a trench and then you've got a rifle that's like, I want to say it was like 62 inches from barrel to stock, it was a giant rifle. It's kind of hard to whip around in the trenches and get back up over the top with. It also had a tendency to jam really, really easily when it got dirty, which, I mean, guess what happens when you're fighting in mud and dirt? It's going to get dirty. The one advantage that it did have over the other rifles is that this is a straight pull bolt instead of a standard bolt action rifle. Meaning that instead of having to come up with the bolt and then back and then forward and then back down to load another round, you could just pull back and then push straight forward, fire, pull back, push straight forward. So this is a huge advantage because you can fire faster, but it's also a disadvantage because this rifle is 5 yards long and you can't like get up, fire, come back down to reload, come back. It's just, he was part of one of the divisions that never got a chance to try to swap out to the Lee Enfield, which the Enfield is a bucket list World War II gun for me. I have a long-running interest in World War II bolt-action rifles, and that's one that I definitely want. The collection's small. I have 2 Russians at the moment, but I don't have any Allied rifles yet. So if you guys know anybody, hook me up. The only thing that he claimed that wasn't true during this whole interview is that he said that he was put in for a DSO, which he never was. About a month after he got home, he ties the knot with a girl named Eva Tranche. Her father had arranged this marriage with Francis before he left for war. So this part's a little kind of... Well, when they got married, Eva was 16. So, again, let's math. That means that this marriage was arranged 4 years previously before he went to war. So she was 12 when his father-in-law decided that they would be married when he got back. Anywho, in August of 1919, The council members of the Perry Island Band paid for Francis and his new child wife to go to Toronto so that he could receive his 3rd military medal and 2 bars. He's not getting this from some military higher up or some mayor or something. He's getting this pinned on his chest directly from the Prince of Wales, future King of England, Edward VIII. A crowd of 50,000 plus gathered at the Canadian National Exhibition to see all 200 men decorated by the Crown Prince. He was asked by a reporter about his combat experience, and he told him that he killed 378 Germans with his rifle at range. He didn't take claim for any close-range kills. He preferred to stay hidden and drop them from a distance. Both the Toronto media and the North Star made a huge deal about the meeting between the native warrior and the prince. Quote, "It was one of these stirring moments of the great fair, and the crowd cheered lustily that the brave red man, whose doughty deeds thrilled an army, sturdy, well set up, and with soldierly brevity, he thanked his future sovereign as his decoration was pinned to his chest. His people watched the scene with interested eyes. It must have been one of the proudest moments of their lives, and it is a tribute to British justice that those who dwell under the flag, be they red man or black, come to love it and are willing to die for it as their own." So, after all the dogs and ponies have been put up from the show, he settles back down into civilian life. He's given a job as a fire ranger by the local Indian agent. He'd do this during the summer when it's, obviously wildfires are more of a concern. And in the winter, he cut railroad ties for the Canadian National Railway. He's not real happy with his position in life. He thought that he deserved more from his country, and he absolutely did. But the local Indian agent, Alexander Logan, the man who, quote unquote, gave him these jobs, thought that he should just be happy with the opportunities that he had given him. This guy's a scumbag. He didn't take this position seriously at all because he's got other jobs where he's like running construction for buildings in town. He's got a couple of shops that he owns. This is basically just a political position for him that was given to him so that he can advance himself at some point. He refused to answer letters from the Indians. He refused to attend meetings with the band councils. He often ignored orders to do things from his own department. And during 1919, Francis wanted to take a loan out to buy a farm. He wanted to use the Soldier Settlement Act. So things get heated between Logan and Peghamagabow, and Francis goes over his head and writes to the Soldiers' Aid Commission saying that Logan wouldn't help him. Indian Affairs writes to Logan to see what's going on, and he told them that he, quote, could not and would not help Francis go into farming because he received a mysterious letter from another Indian saying that Peghamagabow had gotten a bunch of money after he parted ways with the army, but he blew it all gambling and buying liquor and all this stuff, and he told them he deserved nothing under the Soldier Settlement Act. Indian Affairs refused his loan application. And this is going to start to kick off a feud between Indian Affairs and Veteran Affairs, which unfortunately for a lot of these guys, they were veterans, but they were treated like Indians. There's really no other way to put it other than that. In the 1920s, a large group of native vets would form the League of Indians of Ontario, and Frederick Loft was named the president. Indian Affairs didn't really worry too much about this group, but the bureaucrats did. They would work through Indian Affairs to undermine this organization because they viewed Loft and his ideas as a threat. At one point, they even considered revoking his Indian status to shut him up, which I'm not sure how you do that. That'd be like telling somebody, I know that you're white and you've been white your entire life, but you're no longer white. I know both of your parents are black and you're black, but you're not black anymore. You're not allowed to be black. That's a weird thing to try to do. So what they did instead was to make an amendment to the Indian Act, which would make it illegal for this group to receive any funding from any of the Indian bands associated with it without permission from Indian Affairs. So because Indian Affairs is getting directly involved in this and saying, you can't get money from any of the tribes that are like the bands that are part of this unless we say that you can, they're not getting any money. Loft came to Perry Sound June 9th, 1921, and Francis met with him and immediately took to his ideas. He's very involved with getting the Perry Island, the Perry Sound Band to join the league. By 1925, Francis realized that he wasn't going to make any headway and thought that the best way to do anything is to get himself a white lawyer. Enter John Hett, a fellow World War I veteran that had been so badly injured by an artillery shell in the head that he spent over a year in hospitals unable to walk or talk. So this guy got screwed up. After he recovered, he took advantage of a veteran education program and ended up getting a law degree. That's dedication. To get your bag rattled so bad that you can't walk and then go, I'm going to go be a lawyer now. That's impressive. What drew Hett to the cause was Peghamagabow's claim that Indian Affairs had screwed them out of 29 square miles that they then used to create the town of Perry Sound. Now Chief Peghamagabow, Francis had some backlash from someone that wanted his spot over the fact that he's giving permission for people to do some stuff without getting the backing of the tribal council. And this guy started in at one of these meetings, and he's on Francis's ass the entire day, just harassing him and, whatever. He got so mad. Francis got so mad that he allegedly pulled a pearl-handled revolver and offered to take care of business outside like gentlemen. So he still had his backers in 1923 and was reelected over one of the opposition that was against him, obviously. The guy that he beat started a petition in 1925 with Indian Affairs to have him removed and replaced by who? The guy who started a petition, obviously. After Indian Affairs got involved, they swayed everyone from him, and in 1926, the elections held. The only vote for Francis Peghamagabow as chief came from Francis Peghamagabow. After having his band turn on him, he re-enlists in the army and qualifies as a sergeant. But since there's no war to fight yet, he becomes an instructor, and he is right back in his glory at this point. He's back in the only place where he was ever really treated as an equal. One of his soldiers, Roy O'Halloran, which you can't go any further from Francis Peghamagabow until you hit Roy O'Halloran, because you've got Native American and then Irish as it has ever been. He has this to say, quote, "Peggy was a good guy. He was a sergeant major in A Company of the Northern Pioneers, and we used to go to camp together every year for a couple of weeks. New Liskeard was one of the first camps I went to in 1930, and we were billeted near the old racetrack grounds. Peggy used to come around and show us how to clean up and keep from getting soaked in the tents, after a heavy rainstorm. He had been around quite a bit in the First World War. He was more of a father type to me. At that stage, I was only 16, and I considered him a real fine old man," which, he's in his 40s, so that's not an old man. Shut up, kid. Of course, he was from the First World War, and I was just a young fellow. I thought the world of Peggy. He was good to me, and he had the respect, I think, of most of the company. Goes to speak to the guy's character. He was a good dude, and he didn't care if you were white, pink, purple, black, green, red. It didn't matter. If you were in a military uniform, you were one of his people. In 1930, a local doctor visited the units to do exams on the troops, and noticing Peghamagabow's advanced age, again, he's in his early to mid 40s. Let's lay off. That's not that old. And some of us are getting there, so just chill. He suggested he go to Toronto for further examinations. He told the hospital there that Francis suffered from weak spells, shortness of breath, cough, pain in the sides and back, high blood pressure, heart issues, memory problems, and hallucinations of being shot. Which, that all sounds pretty awful. It turns out that this doctor had been part of the Canadian Medical Corps that was in France and England. So he may or may not have actually met this guy beforehand, but he's going to look out for veterans because that's what he's going to do. He also knew that from talking to Francis for quite a while, because they held a lot of pretty long conversations. He knew that because he didn't come back home visually wounded, he didn't qualify for what would basically be disability pension. Yeah, you came home and your brain is a bag of broken glass and spiders, and you have internal problems, but because you're not missing a limb or you're not scarred, you don't count. That's gross. Anyway, Francis wrote in a letter to the Pension Commission, quote, "At the last part of the war, my head didn't work with me so well. I just simply go out of my mind, but not as a crazy man, as the boys tell me. I go about front, same as usual, in daytime. Anyway, as gossip makes it, I'm supposed to be half crazy now. Maybe you're crazy before, who knows?" In April of 1930, he is finally awarded his pension due to his chronic breathing issues. They retroactively paid him $959.50, which today translates to $18,496.80. Which that's a good chunk of money, especially back then. That's a ton of money back in the 30s. The only problem was that the bank manager and the local Indian agent were both made trustees of his money, meaning that they could kind of control what he did and didn't do with it. He's also receiving a monthly stipend of $6.15, which is $32.47 a month now, to help supplement his pension. And this would have been $8.15 had he not gone back into the service. But had he not gone back into the service, he would have gone crazy, I think. So he wasn't happy about having the Indian agent's name on his bank account because he saw it as just another way that Indian Affairs is going to control his life by not letting him take his money that he had earned without their permission. An old buddy of his, Isaac Rice, who was also wounded at the Battle of Passchendaele, is supporting a family of 7 on $300 a year. And he was told by Daly, the Indian agent, that he would have to pay a, quote, $10 a month relief payment. So they are going to take $120 of this guy's $300 that he earns a year to manage his account, which is disgusting. So between that and the fact that during the Great Depression, Indians weren't eligible for the same kind of assistance that other veterans would get under the War Veterans Allowance Act, everybody's mad. This act said that Indian veterans would be treated like Indians on the reservation and not the veterans that they were. They would be cut down to a $40 a month payment unless they were married, and then they would get $70 a month, which, wow, what a difference that is. Money's tight for Francis, and in order to make sure his kids get an education, he sends his 2 eldest sons, William and Michael, to St. Vincent's Orphanage to be raised by the sisters there. In February 1940, Peghamagabow did another medical exam and got his disability pension raised by 20% to a mind-blowing $26 a month, which is handy because he now has a total of 6 kids. Thankfully, Canada declared war on Germany in 1939 when they were told to by the Crown, and a TNT plant was built just north of Parry Sound. Francis takes a position as a guard there. And I wanted to throw this in earlier. I probably should have thrown it in earlier, but I'm going to read it here. This is from a letter that was written by someone in Indian Affairs in 1919. Quote, "In addition to the 378 enemies disposed of by sniping, it is said that he also accounted for 20 by bayonet, 8 by clubbing, and 2 by strangulation. This proves that what we call commando tactics are an old story to the Indians. The Indians in warfare have always had unbound courage, intelligence, initiative, and an amazing stamina, have readily adapted themselves to discipline. In daring and intrepidity, they were second to none. It was not long before Francis's officers found out that he had the instinct or sagacity inherent from a long line of forest fighters, of finding his way around in the dark by stealth, and that he could penetrate the enemy's lines and return safely almost at will." Which that's a thing that a lot of people I don't think realize is a lot of the special forces tactics that were early on were all adapted from Native Americans, because these guys could come into your camp in the middle of the night and steal the top of your head and you wouldn't even know they were there, which is wild. They were real damn good at what they did. The National Resources Mobilization Act passes in June 1941, which requires everyone to register for the draft at the age of 16. Service would be voluntary, and the Department of Justice made sure that Indians knew that they weren't exempt from it this time. Both of the eldest Peghamagabow boys were called to serve, but Francis wrote to the Department of War saying that taking them off to war would make life harder for the household because they're taking away two sets of hands that can work and make money to help support the family. I believe that we had it's like a hardship clause or something like that where I know that during it's going to sound stupid in the 60s and 70s, like the NBA and ABA drafts, you could go for I don't remember what they called it exactly, a hardship draft where you could go after like 2 years of college instead of having to play 4, and you could go and get drafted. I'm pretty sure they did a similar thing with the military too. This worked for a bit, but then William came up with a way of getting out of serving by making up an illness, and it worked. So he didn't have to go. After World War II, the First Nations people were starting to get to the point that they are fed up with just about everything given to them. They didn't want their sons to be sent to die in future wars for a country that didn't care about them. There's also the issues of Indians having to pay income tax on money that they made off the reservation. And considering that they weren't treated as citizens by the Canadian government, they didn't feel that they should have to pay taxes at all. I fall firmly into the camp of taxation is theft. I'm building a bulldozer. This includes paying taxes on money made from things like fishing, fur trapping, and hunting. A huge chunk of tribes came together and formed the Brotherhood of Canadian Indians and elected George Suey as the secretary. He's cool with it, but he wants to be called Chief of the Committee for the Rights and Protection of Indians, which, whatever, is a little grandiose, but... So it turns out that this guy's a well-known turd stirrer, and Indian Affairs informed the committee that he wasn't even a chief in his own tribe. Turns out he kind of got stomped out in the previous election. And in an effort to calm people down, Suey invited the now again Chief Peghamagabow to join the organization. After being refused 5 times for loans to buy horses and tools to clear his property, Peggy's pissed. And between that and Indian Affairs continuing to jerk him around, he takes the invite. 56 delegates from 14 bands got together and would eventually form the National Indian Government. In October 1946, after returning from the first meeting of this government, Francis attended a secret meeting in Ontario somewhere. Here they come up with some changes to the Indian Act that they would like to see. Quote, Canada's 150,000 Indians are practically destitute. They're dependent on the Indian Affairs branch in Ottawa, which is composed of whites. Indians are not receiving proper education. What schools there are do not fit the Indian to take his proper place in his own society, and certainly not in the society of white men, because they didn't care about Indians. With all the fighting against Indian Affairs he's doing and listening to his people to try to get them fair treatment, this earns him the position of Supreme Chief in 1949. They put a bill out to the Canadian government telling them that they wanted more rights and they wanted equal treatment and they wanted citizenship. The government shot it down and wanted to change the wording, which is being done basically to get the Indians to shut up and settle down for a little bit. At the next National Indian Government meeting, the delegates, including Peghamagabow, rejected the changes made to the bill, and then they went to the United Nations to have the North American Indian Nation recognized. Obviously, that didn't happen because, a lot of different reasons, but I think that because they didn't technically own the land that they were on, that probably didn't help their case either, because yes, they've been there for generations and shit, but the Canadian government owns the reservation and they just allow them to live there. So for all of his work here, he is reelected as the Supreme Chief. He is the only man to ever be elected to that position twice. And I hate to do this, but this is kind of where the story ends. Francis Peghamagabow died August 5th, 1952, of a heart attack at the age of 61. There's a better than 0% chance that this was linked directly to lung damage from his time in the trenches. I really had no idea about anything in his life other than the fact that he was, again, the most prolific sniper in World War I, and that's why I was like, oh, I got to put this guy on the list because he's excellent. I'm really glad that I grabbed his name out of the hat, and I got a chance to look into him. He's a warrior on and off the battlefield for his people. And it's unfortunate that he didn't live long enough to see all of his hard work pay off when the First Nations people gained the right to vote in 1960. They finally also gained citizenship in 1960, 40 years after the natives here in the United States got the right in 1924. So Native Americans didn't just get treated like garbage here, but Canada actually did it longer. But again, they're not going to take claim for that because, you know, they've got to be more progressive than us. But enjoy your Stanley Cup drought. It's been, 31 years since Canadian teams won it. So suck it, I guess. Yeah. It's a sad story, but there's a lot of good that came out of it. And the guy was just a lot of fun to read about. So with that being said, I would highly recommend that you head over to patreon.com/1159media for $5 a month. $5 is all you really need. It gets you early access to my show. It gets you early access and backdoor access to Guestnicity with Luther, which is a fantastic show. It'll get you early access and backdoor access to 911 calls and the Never Daily with pretty much everybody, usually Sam and Chase. Jess is on there a lot too. I've been on it once, but I was very nervous. So also hadn't recorded in like 2 months. If you want to see how the sausage is made, it had been a couple months since I had gotten behind a microphone when I did that one. So I was a little skittish, but now I'm back in the swing of things. Yeah. You also have Chase with Almost Fiction, who some of the people he covers on there are incredibly crazy. Makes me really glad that I didn't try to do a true crime show also, because they're like, man, I'm the worst at this on here. I'd have felt really bad. But I can tell you, I'm probably the best history focused podcast on the network, which take that. Or if you want to support me directly, you can go over to Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You can throw me a couple bucks on there if you want. It's appreciated, whatever you can afford if you want to. If you don't want to, that's awesome too. I don't care. Just spread the word. Maybe $5 a month, you want to throw that to me or whatever, and that'll help me replace light bulbs so that I don't have to steal light bulbs from work. I don't know. No, I've never stolen light bulbs from work. I've been given light bulbs from work. I don't know if you can embezzle light bulbs. God, I hope not. I might have incriminated myself just now. Anyway, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you can. And we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like Francis Peghamagabow. Thanks, guys.